Remember all those utility textures we baked? Well, now's the time we will incorporate them into our color texture information. So I'm going to switch to slot 7 so we can see the before and after. And then Shift-Control-Click on the skin color texture. I'm going to line them up in preparation for mixing. All right, so this is the raw base color texture. And Shift-Control-Clicking on displacement A, remember, this is a broader variety of tones based on our geometry. And we can mix those together with a color mix RGB node. And the operation I want to set to soft light. And then we'll grab displacement A, put it into color slot 2, Shift-Control-Click on that. And then hit the M key to mute it on and off. So when I edited this video, I realized I didn't explain the soft light blend mode choice at all, and I probably should. So this grouping of soft light, linear light, and overlay all perform a similar function in varying degrees. Soft light is the most subtle, overlay is a little more intense, and linear light is very intense. And so as I drag up soft light all the way to 1 and then back down, what's happening is that the dark values from our second input are taking the underlying color and moving them towards black, but also increasing saturation. That's a key difference compared to a multiply, which just takes the underlying color toward black. So we're losing the flesh tone. And soft light maintains the flesh tone, darkens it, and kind of intensifies it. Same thing is true with the white values. It kind of brightens and increases saturations in those areas compared to like a screen or ad, which just takes the bright areas towards white. And so soft light, again, is the most subtle. Overlay does similarly, but is a little more intense and also seems to lean a little more towards red, where soft light is maybe a little more orangey, very subtly, at least with the colors we have in color slot 1. Hard light, or in this program it's called linear light, it's often called hard light in other apps, but that is extremely intense. So even if we go way down to like 0.05 and then hold shift and bring it up, it's kind of doing the same thing as soft light in the very low values, but as we go higher and higher, it's obviously way too intense. So I find that either soft light or overlay, I've used both for the same purpose, is an excellent blend mode for layering these skin maps together. All right, so you can see that our colors are inheriting that variety of tone and increasing the level of detail a little bit. All right, so that's stage 1. Let's add the next one, also a soft light. And remember, this one is the same concept, but the values are more concentrated in tighter areas like wrinkles and bumps. And so if we make that the same type of soft light and then turn it on and off, you can see the layers begin to build up and the fidelity of our color texture is increasing with each layer. Now, if we want to get closer, I need to change my clip start value. Oh, I forgot that I left my scene on Imperial. Let's switch it back to metric and go to 0.01 for the clip start value. Now we can get nice and close. And the third layer is also going to be a soft light, and it's our skin pore texture. Remember, same concept, but even more concentrated in the pores, small wrinkles, and small bumps. All right, so let's plug that into our third soft light. Shift-Control-Click to see that. Okay, turn it on and off. Now, this one actually makes the skin darker as a whole. So that tells me that this texture leans more towards dark than a 50% gray. So we can fix this by adding a converter color ramp. And let's see, I'll switch to B-spline. We can drag up the black values a little bit, so we're concentrated on our pores, and then drag down the white value further. There we go. Now we're getting kind of the fuller spectrum, but it's just shifted towards the lighter gray. So let's see what that looks like now in the soft light. Basically, I want the overall tone of the skin to stay the same. I don't want it to lighten or darken. I just want the details to lighten and darken. So let's turn that on and off. And that's closer, but I still feel like we need to go lighter. Maybe bring down the black flag ever so slightly to like 0.07. All right, let's turn that soft light on and off. There we go. I've maintained the skin tone overall, but the pores and the bumps and the small wrinkles are now outlined a little bit better, emphasized a little bit better. And so all of a sudden, when we layer our utility textures with that simple base color texture, we have a pretty legit skin texture for a lot less effort than if we tried to paint all this detail by hand. And we're not even done with the skin texture. We will be adding another hand-painted layer in a future video, but now you can finally see why we baked all those textures and kept our base color so simple. So let's see what this looks like plugged into our principled BSDF, hopefully taking a big step towards realism. Ooh, that's looking good. Let's take a closer look. All right, Alt-J, seeing before, no utility textures involved, and with utility textures. So yeah, that's a pretty big step towards realism in my opinion. However, there is a big temptation to overuse the utility textures. One key reason they're beneficial is that it bridges the gap between the color texture and our geometry, as I mentioned through the baking process. But if there's too much of a connection between texture and geometry, it starts to look stylized and unrealistic. Especially with wrinkles and pore detail, my experience would say that you want the material, the subsurface material, doing most of that work. It's an option to emphasize that a little bit with the utility textures, but if you overdo it, the subsurface loses its effect and it starts to just look hyper-realistic or kind of stylized. I think a lot of game cinematic characters have this type of like overly gritty, realism pushed too far kind of aesthetic. And so I'm kind of flirting with that line right now, which is just something I want to keep in mind. Honestly, I should probably dial down the soft light mix values to like 0.3. Or individually control them. We have the option to dial this down per layer, but at this point I'm really just trying to get the components involved for easy tweaking as we go. And to that effect, I'm very happy with our setup right now. My mindset in the early phases of skin material creation is a lot of data collection, remembering the behaviors of various parameters, remembering my options that I set up, and being aware so I can tweak it as the context further develops. That's another crucial point, because if we maximize our view, or our render rather, it's easy to get caught in this loop of trying really hard to make this test render look like perfect skin. And I've done this many times where I will spend hours just tweaking little settings, tweaking the texture, and never really getting that photorealistic payoff. And it's taken me a lot of years to realize this will never look perfect as long as my eyes are blank white, there's no hair, there's no post-processing like slight chromatic aberration, there's no clothes, the fact that the shoulders are unfinished. There's way too much context missing from this render that does affect our perception of reality. And so one of the most important things I can tell you about the process is don't commit too hard too soon. And that's what we're going to do now. Even though I know the skin material is not perfect at this point, it's better to pause on the skin and move on to the eyes, the clothing, maybe even the hair before coming back to addressing the skin material and perfecting it to its final state. And so the last thing I want to do for this, first half of skin material creation is render several tests of various lighting scenarios. So we'll go down to slot 8 and render the other environment texture at the top, that bright sunlight, and see how that looks with our material. Now, I think it'll be a little inconsistent because I did decrease the value of the soft light. Even though this is probably the right change, for consistency in our comparison renders, I'll go back up to 0.5 just to see how it looks in different light. All right, let's render that. Ooh. Ooh. I like the way that looks. But I'm such a sucker for that hyper-realistic kind of stylization. I don't think it looks like this dude has showered in a while, and that's not necessarily that realistic. It's kind of like the equivalent of making everything grimy in computer graphics. It's harder to make things look clean and new, and most people's faces aren't that dirty. So let's compare it to some photographic reference. We'll switch this to an image editor, take a look at our man. That's not loading for some reason. Let's see what happened to our CC0 man reference. Okay, find someone who's similar. Okay, it looks like this guy. And actually that's helpful because if we switch back to our previous render, one of the big differences is the photo is definitely missing that distinct zones of the face coloring, which we implemented in the beginning. I think I've already said that the 5 o'clock shadow is way too strong. I want to dial that back down, but even the middle being too red, or at least the forehead being too yellow, the color zones are too distinct, and I need to tone that down. In a way, a boring reality of this photo is that there's not a ton of variety in the skin color. And I just find that as an artist, my tendency is to exaggerate things. So anyway, all that to say, even though I really like the way this render looks, or at least the direction it's going, for the sake of realism, I should probably dial down some of those soft light mixes. But once again, that's just a nugget of data I'm going to keep in the back of my mind for the next phase of perfecting the skin shader. I still want to continue. Let's go to slot 6 and render various lighting conditions. So the middle environment texture was the studio that came with Blender. Let's go ahead and render that. All right, all right. So this definitely has more of a front key light direction, which, you know, might not be my preference as far as appealing lighting, but it does show kind of the quality of the colors in our skin texture, which I think is good. Aside from the obvious change, especially in the 5 o'clock shadow, that has got to be toned down. All right, let's do another one. We'll duplicate these two nodes at the bottom, Shift-Control-D. So we keep the mapping socket coming in. And let's see if there's another environment texture included with Blender that, let's see, where was that? World. Since I've used these textures a lot, I know that Courtyard is extremely orange, and I know that City is very overcast. Forest is pretty good. Let's try Forest. See what that looks like. Now the energy looks wrong right out of the gate. So let's do our test. We want that gray value in the principled BSDF, but since we've established some of the subsurface settings, let's just duplicate the principled BSDF, backspace to reset it, change the base color to that 0.5 value, and then whenever we want to test for lighting energy, we just Shift-Control-Click on that. So yeah, way too dark on the forest. Let's go all the way up to 1. And yeah, I think 1 is probably realistic. And the lighting looks okay. I don't know if it's due to the low resolution of the included environment textures, but commonly I feel like they're just a little bit bland. So this will be the last one that I test of the internal textures. And then I want to grab another from HDRI Haven, which I find to be much higher quality. But of course we can alter, let's see, I like the 10 degrees rotation on the Studio Small 7. So let's just Shift-Control duplicate this and reset it. Apply that to our forest. Anytime I want unique rotations on an environment, just duplicate a mapping node and then we can rotate it around. Let's try 45, maybe 180. Okay, more of a backlighting. How about 150? Yeah, let's try that. Although, oh, before I render, we want to actually plug up our skin BSDF. I don't love this one. Maybe I didn't get the value right on the light energy. I mean, the subsurface in the ears is holding up pretty well. I think the neck looks a little better in this lighting. Not so extreme, though still, I don't know. I might have to tone this down. But yeah, the lighting is maybe too naturalistic, not dramatic enough. So they're good for testing, but I do like to grab from HDRI Haven. So let's do one more and switch over to our browser. Let's go back to our studio setups. And one of these at the top just seems a little more interesting. It's not quite so sterile in terms of the studio setup. There's a little more happening. And I kind of like the additional colors here in the Christmas Photo Studio 01. These helpful previews tell me that the shadow is dark, so we've got more dramatic lighting. When the shadows aren't so defined, it means there's a lot more fill light, like this example. So that's kind of what I'm looking for in this next test. So we will download this 4K EXR. That's fine. I will save link as, put it here in our environment folder. And let's load that into our Blender scene. Once again, I will duplicate these 3 nodes, sort of expecting to have to rotate this texture. Let's go find that. Christmas. Shift Control, click on the background node. Okay, yeah, right away I can see we're going to get a more dramatic lighting. At this point, you know I'm all about that drama. And I think I will turn off the background. If you don't want to see the environment texture being rendered, go to your render settings. Under Film, choose Transparent. I tend to find that a little more distracting than helpful. And so yes, we've got our texture rotated at 150 degrees in Z. I do kind of like that. When we turn it to 0, it's much more illuminated by that orange color, which, you know, any angle is fine for testing, but I do like to find one that's a little more to my liking. And I did kind of like 150. Actually, I kind of liked it a lot. What about 120? Yeah, let's go with that. I wonder if the orange is going to be too strong. We do have the option, of course, to add a color hue saturation and turn down saturation to like 0.8, or turn down any of them. Let's try 0.5 to get a little closer to white light rather than, you know, bright orange light. So yeah, I think I'll keep that, and we'll make this the final render test of this lesson. Okay, let's take a closer look. Certainly on the vibrant side, but I think it looks good. It's holding up in these various lighting conditions. I love the subsurface on the ear here. That reads very realistically to me. And in general, yeah, I think it's holding up well in various lighting conditions. Let's switch through them with J. Yes, I think this is confirming that our skin material is in the right direction. It's not perfected, but it's not off the rails. We are headed towards realism. So that is a big milestone accomplished in my book. If you feel the same about a head you're creating, congrats. I strongly encourage you to celebrate these milestones. Next, we'll shift gears into addressing our eye material.